Okay, so I'll get right back to the verses because I'd like to try to finish them during this session, and then hopefully we can do so. And then at the end, hopefully there'll be a little extra time for any closing comments or also for a question and answer. So we left off here with this section on Ishvara. So we had the reasoning. We were in the section on the negating the self of phenomena, and then within that, we went through the four close placements of mindfulness, and now we're going through the different syllogisms or reasonings that negate self of phenomena. So we first have the diamond shards reasoning, which is that the object is sprout. It is not inherently born because it is not generated from self, other, both, or neither. And so we went through, we're going now through permanent causes. So the question is, can something be born from something that's permanent? And so we've gone through the one possibility that there is a permanent creator God. The other possibilities of permanent causes, even if there is no creator God. So that's what the next part is about. So rejecting further permanent causes. So first of all, there's the Vaiseshika, who we talked about earlier. And they posit subtle changeless particles. So the subtle changeless particles exist was also stopped before. So this is very simple. It's just that he already gave some reasonings to negate subtle changeless particles in some of the earlier verses, if you recall, in the section on close placement of mindfulness and feeling. So he's just leaving it at that. And then with the Samkhya, to say the Samkhyas hold that permanent prakriti is the cause of things. You might recall, we talked about this yesterday. There was another section on Samkhya. So in their philosophy, that the self and the mind, which is the same thing, are an unchanging awareness, permanent, without any particular object that just exists, separate from everything else in the phenomenal world. And the phenomenal world includes both physical things and also mental phenomena. So like emotions and thoughts, those are all separate from the self. And so the fault, what causes samsara, is to identify the self with any of those objects of mind and objects of the phenomenal world. And all of the phenomenal world ultimately comes down to prakriti, which is the I was looking for a good translation of it. I think the primal substance is I think maybe the best way to translate it. So there's this primal substance that then manifests as all the different things in the phenomenal world, but actually all of them by nature are just this primal substance, prakriti. And so by recognizing that, then one can be free of it. The first one has to understand that this permanent prakriti is the cause of all things. And actually, yeah, so I fixed the translation in the next verse by looking through the commentary, but actually I should have changed it in this verse too. So I'll tell you here, it shouldn't say Prakriti is the cause of beings. It should be Prakriti is the cause of a manifestation or movement. So because in the Tibetan it has Droe Gyuyembar. Droa usually means migrating beings, but actually here it's just referring to motion. That's how I tripped up on that, but then I recognized it in the next verse and then forgot about change it here. So Prakriti, because in their understanding, Prakriti is the cause of manifestation of all the different things in the phenomenal world that move, but Prakriti is unmoving and permanent. It just manifests as these things in motion. So it shouldn't say it's the cause of beings, because that's actually not the case. The being is the one thing that's not resulting from Prakriti. It's the only thing that exists that is not part of the phenomenal world. So Prakriti is the cause of the phenomenal world. So they say, when sattva, rajas, tamas are in equilibrium, they're called Prakriti. So there's this three gunas, sattva, raja, and tamas. And when those things are in equilibrium, that is prakriti. When they're lopsided, that thing they call development. So when they're lopsided, that is the manifestation. So development is, again, drowa in Tibetan, just movement. But it means it's referring to the manifestation, which will later be talked about, selwa or namgyur. These are all the Tibetan words. So selwa is like clarity, that it becomes clear. The prakriti is unclear. We don't see it directly, but it's clarified through its manifestations. The namgyur is manifestations. Namgyur is sort of like expression in Tibetan, the word namgyur. So it expresses itself in the phenomenal world. So when it's in balance, then that's prakriti. But when it's unbalanced, which it is at the moment for most of us, then it's the phenomenal world. So the way to be free is first to balance it so that we can see it. Once we see it for what it is, then we can be free of it, because we can recognize how it's creating our samsara. So the first thing is to gain balance. So I believe, because the system of yoga, which by yoga, I don't just mean like modern yoga, but yoga, like the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali in India, these were strongly tied in with the Samkhya philosophy, as I understand it. And so that what they're trying to do is to find balance, because if they bring balance to the phenomenal world and to their minds, then they can see prakriti for what it is, and then they can break free of it. So that's the first step. But in any case, this prakriti is meant to be a permanent thing that just manifests as a changing world. So what Shantideva responds to this is, to say a singularity is threefold is unsound. So you've just said that the prakriti is an unchanging essence that is singular and permanent, but at the same time, it's the balance of the three gunas. So that doesn't make any sense, because then it becomes threefold nature as opposed to a singularity. And so it's non-existent. So I'm saying that what you call prakriti can't be a real thing. Gunas each are threefold too, so don't exist. And each of the gunas themselves are threefold. So actually, I'm not totally clear why that would be. It doesn't say clearly in the commentary either. And I don't know their philosophy deeply enough, why they would say that each of the gunas are threefold, but I guess they would have to say that each of them contains the other one. They might say that each of the individual ones also contains the other ones, in which case they become threefold nature, not a single, but nothing is a threefold nature. Everything has its own nature. So if there's no qualities, and qualities is gunas here, if there's no qualities, then sound's existence is cast far afield. Because you say that all things in the universe, all phenomenal things like sound and form, are just manifestations of the imbalance of those qualities. But if there's no qualities, then there can't be any sound. And mindless things like cloth and such cannot encompass happiness. So what this is saying, so happiness here actually, I believe, refers to the sattva, because they in their system, where they say the three gunas of sattva, tamas, and rajas are also in other contexts called happiness or pleasure, because they pleasure, pain, and equanimity. So that's just another way of referring to those three. So here, and I say probably means sattva because I can't remember if happiness is sattva. I think it is, and then pain is rajas, and tamas is the equilibrium, I believe, but I may be wrong. But in any case, he's just saying that if there is no prakriti, there can't be the gunas. And if you say that the gunas exist somewhere else other than prakriti, then things like cloth and such, just phenomenal things in the world, cannot be the holders of these gunas. So if we negate prakriti, then we negate gunas, and therefore we need to get a phenomenal world. But that's obviously not the case. So it's showing there's some problem with their philosophy. If things in nature were its cause, we've already assessed things, no? So then if you say there's truly existent things in the world that are the causes of the three gunas, but we've already negated that there is truly existent things earlier in the text. What you call cause with the bliss and such is not a source for cloth and such. So the thing that you posit as the cause, which is prakriti, which has bliss, the bliss and the other so bliss being one of the three gunas, is not a cause for cloth and such. It can't give rise to these physical things. If cloths gave rise to bliss and such, when they aren't there, the bliss is gone. So the point was that permanent things can't give rise to impermanent things. But then if you say that cloths are the cause of the bliss, or the cause of the three gunas, when they aren't there, then it's gone because the cloths are impermanent. So the gunas also can't last forever. If bliss and such are permanent, that's nowhere seen to be the case. We don't see anything in the phenomenal world that's permanent. If bliss and such are manifest, then why don't we experience them? So likewise, you've said that Prakriti is the non-manifest, unseen thing, but that the gunas are the manifest. But then why don't we experience them? If they're manifest, they should be part of the world, and we should be able to say, oh, there's guna, there is sattva, and there is tamas, and there is rajas. But we don't actually see them. But then they would say they're subtle, whereas the other things like sound and form are the coarse manifestation. So if that's because they're subtle, how the subtle and the coarse exist? Well, then tell us, what do you mean? What's subtle and what's coarse? Discarding coarseness, subtlety appears, then they're impermanent. So if you say that the three gunas they then manifest as a coarse thing, then they change. They were first subtle and then they manifest as coarseness, then they're impermanent. But they don't say that in their system. So why don't you assert all things like that to be impermanent? Really, everything should be impermanent, but you say everything is ultimately the nature of Prakriti, which is permanent. If coarse is indistinct from bliss, it's clear that it's impermanent. So if you say that the gunas are one nature with the coarse things in the world, then it's clear that the gunas are impermanent because they're indistinct from the phenomenal nature of the world, and the things of the phenomenal nature of the world are constantly seem to be changing. If you say what does not exist cannot be born because it's not. So this is also part of the Samkhya philosophy, is that everything that exists cannot have come from nothing. And so it must exist at the time of its cause. This might sound a bit strange. They would say that, for example, if you have a sprout, within the seed, there must have been a sprout. Otherwise, it couldn't turn into a sprout. So actually, the thinking here is interesting because they would say, well, why does a seed turn into a sprout and not turn into, for example, a barley seed turns into a barley sprout, not a wheat sprout. But a wheat sprout and a barley sprout does not look anything like a barley seed. So how does it know to turn into a barley sprout, not something else? So therefore, there must be something in the cause that allows it to manifest in that way. So therefore, within the barley sprout, there must be a so within the barley seed, there must be a non-manifest barley sprout. So they say that what does not exist in the first place can never be born because it doesn't exist. So it has to be there in the time of the cause. Although you wish it weren't the case, there's birth when things are manifest. So there it's saying that although you don't want this to be the case because in your system this is not true, you have to say that even when things aren't manifest, there's still birth. Because you say that the barley sprout is only born at the time of manifestation, when we see it. It exists in the seed as a non-manifest thing. However, that non-manifest thing also has to be born, because you also agree that that non-manifest thing is a cause. And it's an effect of her previous cause. So therefore, the non-manifest, it's sort of a problem of regression in the Samkhya. And actually, when we debate about the Samkhya system a bit, about the way the Madhyamaka argues with them, this seems to be a problem. That when you talk about, when you say that this non-manifest thing exists in the time of the seed, then is that manifest thing born? If yes, then you have a problem because you say nothing can be born if it's without a non-manifest thing that then causes it. But then it becomes infinite regression. That non-manifest thing also has to be born somehow. So then, Shantideva, he gets a little bit nasty here, you might say. So he says, If the effects are in the cause, for food, you're eating excrement. So he's just kind of, in some sense, kind of joking about their system. You say that the effects are in the cause, so therefore the food that you eat is the cause for excrement. So therefore there must be excrement that's contained within the food, because all of the results exist in the cause. And for the price of fabric, buy a seed and wear it. So likewise, this is another problem, that the seed contains the fabric that will sprout, the seed will sprout, and then it will be harvested and fabric will be made. So that original fabric must abide in the seed. So why don't you buy a seed and wear the seed? So if the world by ignorance is blind to see, so if you say, well, yes, there is indeed excrement in the food, I agree, and there is a fabric in the seed, but because we are blind to it, because of our ignorance, we don't see it. So your truth seer uniquely sees. So this is the quite, we say, a rude thing to say to them. I think they would be quite offended. So he's saying that basically, okay, so we don't see it, but your truth seer, meaning Kapila, who is the founder of the Samkhya school, he is said to see the truth. So it's saying that, okay, we're not eating excrement, but he is, because he, unlike us, is able to see the excrement in the food. So with seers like that in the world, then why is it that they don't see? So this, I actually wasn't entirely sure if this was saying, with seers like it is in the world, then why is it that they don't see? Or why is it that we don't see them? It's not totally clear either from the verse or from the commentary. But if it's this, it's why with like seers in the world, then why is it that they don't see? When there are people in the world who can see the truth, why don't they see all of these causes, all of these results stacked up in the cause? If worldly minds aren't valid, then the manifest they see is false. So also, if you're saying that ordinary people are ignorant, then you have to say that manifestation, the phenomenal world, doesn't exist, because it's only validated by our seeing it. And you've said that what we see is not actually how it is. So you've negated the world. So this is actually in some sense similar to the Madhyamaka position, that things are not, the validating mind that establishes conventions is itself false. But that's okay in our system, because for something to exist, it does not have to be validated by a truly existent consciousness. So the Samkhya is going to take this right back. So in some sense, and Shantideva is anticipating that. He's saying this in order to, and then see if they'll ask him the same thing. They're going to take that back to him and see what he says, if you say minds are not true. So the same fault does not apply to the middle way position. So the opponent then comes back with, if valid isn't valid then, so if valid cognition is not valid, if it's not truly existent and not established by something else that's ultimately valid, then the things it comprehends are false. So therefore, what it comprehends also must be false, because it can't establish anything. And so it seems to meditate on emptiness is incorrect, because you say that valid, in this context, valid is talking about the mind realizing emptiness, the ultimate, mind realizing the ultimate. But if that mind is not truly existent, then it can't establish emptiness, and therefore it's wrong to meditate on emptiness. There's no establishment of it. The response is, not reaching the imputed thing, you cannot grasp its lack of being. So this is a very important verse, or these two lines for the Geluk school. Tsongkhapa, his interpretation of this is that if you don't identify the object of negation, you cannot negate it. This is actually different than how some other schools interpret this verse, but he considers this to be a proof in the Indian texts that you have to first identify the object of negation in order to negate it properly. And so the imputed thing is what is the object of negation, true existence. So without reaching it or without recognizing it, you cannot grasp its lack of being. You can't negate it. So in emptiness meditation, we first have to have a clear appearance of the object of negation. So he's saying that you're misunderstanding what I mean by emptiness. So we have to first of all come up with a clear appearance of how things appear to our mind. And so whatever thing is false, its lack of being is clearly false. So this this imputed thing, we negate that, and then we're left with emptiness. But emptiness is also false in the sense that it's not truly existent either. It's just the lack of something that is not truly existent. And so the thought that in a dream, a child's death does not exist obstructs the thought that it exists, and yet can also be unreal. So if the idea here is that the death of a child in a dream is like the phenomenal world. And then we can recognize that that's just a dream. That thought, recognizing that, is the mind meditating on emptiness. And it obstructs the thought that it exists. It stops us from thinking that that dream is real, and yet can also be unreal. Yet the thought itself is unreal. Even though it has the function of stopping the wrong conception that the dream is real, nevertheless, it itself is unreal. So by analyzing in that way, it's known that nothing has a cause. So we analyze in this way, and we show that nothing is truly existently produced. So this is coming back to the original point that we're showing that nothing can come from a truly existent cause. The causes and the results are merely imputed based on conventionalities. So then part 4, this is quite short, just rejecting that something can come from both self and other. Because you remember we had, does it come from self, from other, from both, or from no cause? So we've already gone through no cause. We went through the idea of permanent causes, which really, I think, is talking about from other, because usually when we talk about birth from other, it's talking about some kind of solid other. And then probably although it wasn't explicitly said, then there was the birth from self, which was the Samkhya view, that the thing exists at the time of the cause. So now we find finally that both self and other. So a master individually, conditions don't contain results. So whether you talk about self, if things aren't born from self and they aren't born from other, they can't be born from the collection of both of them, because both possibilities don't work. So the collection of them also can't work, because each individual one has been negated. From elsewhere they don't come, nor do they stay, nor go another place. So ultimately, we can't talk about this is we say no coming and no going. That coming and going are all based on reference points. There's no ultimate frame of reference in which events are unfolding. It's only based on a particular way of viewing things. So now we've come to another reasoning, the reasoning of dependent origination. How different from illusions is what ignorance conceives as true. So is there a difference between what we think is true in the world and an illusion? The figments that magicians weave and figments made by causes, check where is it that they come from, and where is it that they travel to? So both the figments of a magician, an illusion, and the figments made by causes, meaning the things in the phenomenal world. Ask where do they come from and where do they go? So you might see the illusion here. I imagine most of you can see it, but in case you can't, you might see there's a tiger in the bottom of this picture. So somebody could ask, well, where did that tiger come from? And where is he going to go? So that question is irrelevant, because it's just an illusion. You don't have to ask where he came from. Conventionally, we could talk about it. We could see if the magician makes an illusion, we could just, and it's moving, we can say, well, it's going there, it's coming from there. But if we try to go beyond that and say, well, what is its ultimate nature, who made it, where did it originally come from, what will happen to it in the distant future, then there's nothing more beyond the simple frame of reference of our current vision of it. It doesn't have any. So we might ask, where did the universe come from, and where is it going to go? This is a big question in science. Perhaps one way to answer that is that what we call the universe is based on our particular frame of reference. And so these questions, it's like we're asking where the illusion ultimately came from. Where did it originally come from? The whole the idea of time is something that's based upon our experience in the universe. So to say before the universe would imply that the universe is contained in some kind of larger universe. But if that's not the case, then it doesn't really make sense to ask where it came from in terms of time. The next, with causes near, it's seen, but when the cause is gone, it disappears. So that's how an illusion functions. When there's causes to the illusion, then you see it. When the magician stops making the illusion, then you no longer see it. It disappears. And that's also how the phenomenal world is. When the causes are present, then consciousness is generated, and it has an experience of a phenomenal world. When those causes cease, then there's no more experience of a phenomenal world. So when one directly perceives emptiness, then it stops those causes, and there's no longer an appearance of a phenomenal world. Like fabricated images, how can it have a shred of truth? So just like the fabricated images that the person sees, how can this world have any shred of truth? So then we have another reasoning, refuting existent or non-existent production. So this would be that a thing cannot, so a sprout, we'd say, does not ultimately come from a seed because it does not exist at the time of the seed. But it also cannot come from the seed if it's non-existent at the time of the seed. So that this is talking about inherent existence, right? So if things exist, what need is there for causes to engender them? If things already exist, they wouldn't need to be caused because they're already there. But if they don't exist, what need for causes to engender them? If they're not existent at all, then a cause isn't going to help, isn't going to make any difference. So it's not to say that they don't, conventionally, the time of the seed, the sprout doesn't exist. But if it was truly non-existent at the time of the seed, then nothing could cause it to exist. Because something that's truly non-existent is not existent in contingence upon something else. So there wouldn't be any way to change it. If its non-existence is contingent upon something, when then that thing that's is contingent upon is no longer acting upon it, then it will become existent. But if it's truly non-existent, then there's no way to change that. 100 million causes can't make something into nothing. If they could, at that time, what exists? So you can't turn something into nothing. You can change it, but you can't make it into nothing. If it could, then at that time what exists? When it does become nothing, then what's there? What other thing comes to exist? So then if there's nothing left, then how is anything ever going to come again? Nothing exists in nothingness. So when does something come to be? Without the generation of a thing, there's no escape from nothingness. So if there was really nothingness, then nothing could ever come. And without anything ever coming, then we'd always have nothingness. With no escape from nothingness, no chance will come for things to be. And things can't turn to nothingness, or else the nature's binary. So this is saying if things could sometimes exist and sometimes not exist, then have a dual nature, twofold nature. They're both existent and non-existent, but that's not the case. If things don't contain this double essence of sometimes they exist and sometimes they don't. And so there's no cessation, nor do things exist. So ultimately, nothing ever ceases. This is like what we say Nagarjuna talking about at the very beginning of his text. Dakamepa kimepa, no cessation, no birth. Ultimately. And what that's saying is that from the perspective of the mind realizing emptiness, there is no cessation. There's nothing that can ultimately be seen and found when you search for it to cease. If it could, then you would have to see it going into nothing. Then you go into nothingness and find it there. But that's not the case. It's just an appearance to mind based on our conventions that we say something no longer exists. But there was no such thing in the first place that then was there and then no longer exists afterwards. And so there's no cessation, nor do things exist. Or exist, I should say exist, right? Or singular, or plural for things. So do things exist? So nothing also ultimately exists. And so it is that migrators are never born and never cease in any way. Nothing ultimately is born, nothing ever ceases. Migrators are like dreams, and when they examine, they're like plantain trees. So again, the example of a dream and the plantain tree we talked about earlier, that when you cut it apart, there's no core, it's just a bunch of leaves. Nirvana and its opposite in suchness are not different. So then it's saying, coming back to the point that in suchness, in emptiness, there's no distinction between liberation and non-liberation. If we have that misconception, then we won't actually be able to achieve liberation. So if any of you have studied Nagarjuna's works, you'll know that Shantideva is drawing heavily upon his philosophy here. This last verse, 149, is very similar to the opening verses of the middle way. And then this idea that nirvana and its opposite in suchness are not different, that's the main topic of Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas on reasoning. So in some sense, I think it's almost as though Shantideva was composing this text just as a meditation manual for himself, trying to put Nagarjuna's work into his points into a concise way that he could meditate on it. So I think this is the end here of the analysis of emptiness. And then it starts with an exhortation to meditate on emptiness. Why should we put effort into that? Exhortation to realize that truth. In empty things, what's to attain and what is there to lose? Who is it showing honor, or who is it that despises me? So he's showing that by meditating in emptiness, we can be free of craving. This is what he said earlier, that by simply meditating on the coarse aspect of the Four Noble Truths, we can't be free of craving. But when we meditate in emptiness, we see that there is nothing that ever is born or dies. So there's nothing to attain, there's nothing to lose. If somebody shows honor, there's no reason to feel pride. And when somebody despises us, there's no reason to be angry, because nothing's really happening on the ultimate level. From where did joy and sadness come? What liking and dislike is there? In suchness, when it's analyzed, who craves? Where is the thing he craves? So again, it's just, if we have some understanding of emptiness, then this can just be something to meditate on. We can go through these verses slowly and meditate. Okay, what is joy? Where does it come from? What is sadness? Where does it come from? What is liking? What does it mean to like something? And what does it mean to dislike something? What is the reason for liking something? Who is the person who craves, and what is the thing that he craves for? When analyzed, what living world that's here and now will ever die? Where is there a truly existent world that we have here now that is in danger of going out of existence? Or how is a person in danger of dying? What comes to be, what comes to pass? Who is my family or my friend? Like me, completely apprehend all things to be like open space. So he's asking us, like he has done, please meditate in emptiness and see that things are just like open space at the ultimate level. That the past and the future are only experienced in that way based on our frame of reference. As long as we maintain that frame of reference, then we'll experience impermanence and suffer as a result of that. But if we can go beyond that frame of reference, there'll be no reason to suffer. At the moment, our minds are very much tied in or entangled with the phenomenal world that we experience. And so we therefore, attach to that and then suffer when it changes. This is the original teaching of the Buddha, but here it's saying it at a much deeper level. What does it really mean to experience something beyond that? Now, in some sense, it's very similar to what the Samkhya was saying, that there's this pure awareness that goes, that's just simply beyond the phenomenal world. However, the way of saying it is different and in an important way, that it's not that there is pure awareness, that ultimately there's nothing there. It's not that nothing exists at all, but in the Samkhya, the pure awareness, the awareness is real, whereas the phenomenal world is unreal. So they both have a very similar idea of what it's like to be liberated, perhaps, but the Madhyamaka at least would say that the Samkhya view, by thinking of things in that way, can be an obstruction, because we start to think that the mind is real. And therefore, we can, although we think we're being liberated from the phenomenal world, really we're actually attached to some kind of mental experience of bliss, which is conditioned. And when that meditative stabilization then fades, then we're back in samsara. Or actually, we were in it all along, but it didn't manifest. So we have to see more deeply and see that all of these things are contingent upon each other and not get attached to anything, not be attached to meditative stabilization and not be attached to the external world either. So then finally, we have the faults of samsara. So then I think Shantideva, he said this whole chapter going quite deeply into emptiness. So he comes back to the original point, some of the things he talked about in the earlier chapters about all of the faults of samsara, such that we can therefore see why somebody might ask, well, why do I want to meditate in emptiness? So he says, well, do you really want to come back to samsara? So he's going to remind us about all the faults of samsara. So those wishing for their happiness by strife and thrill as causes will get agitated or rejoice. So people wish for happiness within the samsaric world. So when they get into fights, they get agitated. And when things go well for them, then they rejoice. They'll suffer, toil, and disagree, and stab each other. Thus, by sin, will lead a troubled life. So this is the way of the world. We suffer and we have to work. And we disagree with each other, and then we fight with each other and cut and stab, and by sin will lead a troubled life. And then as a result, we create negative karma that will then ripen in the future. This is what he goes on to say. They go again to happy births, and they enjoy much pleasure there, but dying fall to suffering realms, protracted and unbearable. So this is, even though the current situation might seem happy, it's unstable because of the causes we've created in the past, that when we die, they'll just ripen, and then we fall into suffering realms. There's many pitfalls in samsara. The truth is hard to come by there. So as long as we are functioning in samsara, then it's very hard to see the truth. There's all kinds of pitfalls, all kinds of wrong paths we can go on and get distracted from searching for the truth. And since one's view opposes it, veracity like this is rare. So because we have the wrong view, then it's very hard to see the right view. We get caught up in distraction, and we cling to things as real. And there is found incomparable distress like never-ending seas. One's power is inferior, and life is short in this place too. So again, this is what happens in samsara. There's never-ending suffering, goes on, and one isn't able to get what one wants, where power is inferior. We want to be more powerful than we are, but we aren't. And life is short. One has to work to live and be in health. There's hunger and fatigue, and sleep and violence, allied with the foolish, life spent uselessly. So as we see this, you might know this is the myth of Sisyphus. Some of you might know the book by Camus. So he had the myth of Sisyphus, who was forever pushing the boulder up the hill. And he was using this as an analogy for life, that you just push a boulder up the hill, and then at the end, just comes back on you, and you die. So what's the point, right? So, Camus had his own philosophy, as many of you know, existentialism, which was basically that the best thing is just to be aware of that, be aware of the absurdity of it, and then enjoy it as much as you can while you're here, which is probably the best answer if there's nothing else you can do about it. But here there's quite a different understanding, that it's not really worth enjoying it. There's actually, if the only option was to enjoy it as much as you can, then maybe that would be the thing to do. But first of all, it's really not that enjoyable when we analyze it. Pushing a rock up a boulder up a hill, because Camus' philosophy was that as long as somebody has something to keep his mind occupied, he'll be conventionally happy. So people, although all they're doing is pushing a rock up a hill, then as long as they get excited about pushing the rock up the hill and put a lot of effort into it, then they'll have, during the course of their life, they'll feel some kind of sense of purpose in life. But really, ultimately, it doesn't accomplish anything. but Camus didn't, as far as as I know, have any idea of meditation, that there's a better option. There's a way to change the mind and experience something different. It's interesting also, my teacher, Chodan Rinpoche, once he gave a teaching, I very much doubt he'd read the myth of Sisyphus, but it was perhaps a somewhat similar idea, but he was saying it in quite a negative way. He was saying that the samsara, it's like somebody who's sitting on the side of the road with a round stone, and he's chiseling it, trying to make it into a square. And somebody says, well, what are you doing? Because I'm trying to make the stone into a square. So what are you going to do with it when it makes a square? He said, I'm going to throw it away. So that's what we do in life. We spend our whole life trying to make something into something else, just create something that doesn't really have any purpose. It's just a square stone, and then we just throw it away when we die. So what's the purpose of that? But of course, Rinpoche was saying that therefore we shouldn't be attached to that. As we see here, life, there's hunger and fatigue, and we have to work to live and be in health. There's a lot of disadvantages, and life is difficult. So then, allied with the foolish, life's spent uselessly. We again, the problem also in samsara is that we get companions who encourage us to engage in negativity or to waste our lives away. So then life's spent useless. Life passes swiftly, aimlessly. Discrimination's hard to find. So that, again, it's very hard in this world to discriminate between the positive and negative actions. Where is a means to leave behind addiction to distracting things. So it's very hard to find a way to free of our attachment to all of these distractions in the world. Mara makes an effort there for you to fall in wicked births, trying to get you to fall into wicked births. Now we could understand Mara here as the negative aspects of our own mind, that there are all these parts of our minds that are just waiting for an opportunity to manifest. We meet the right conditions, and we can be led into doing all kinds of negative actions. Wrong paths are in abundance there, and doubt is hard to overcome. There's all kinds of wrong paths we can take, and it's very difficult to be free of doubt. Doubt is said to be one of the three main obstacles to entering the path. The three main obstacles being attachment to self, which means that we're attached to our present state and our comfort, and we don't want to change. That's the first obstacle. And then the second obstacle is holding wrong spiritual practices to be supreme. So that we think, okay, I do want to engage in the spiritual path, but then we follow the wrong path. The wrong paths that are in abundance there. We think, that, for example, in India, there was all kinds of these things. People think that to purify your karma, then you have to burn yourself or starve yourself. So these are wrong paths. These don't actually lead to liberation. And then finally, doubt. That finally we find the right path, we meet the right teacher, but we have constant self-doubt, and we never think we can do it. And we just hesitate and hesitate and hesitate and never actually follow the path. This leisure is hard to find again. To find the Buddha is very hard. Affliction's flood is hard to dodge. Alas, the stress goes on and on. So this, you might know, there's the saying from the Buddha, from the Dhammapada. What is it? Mini rabdu topkade. So it's very hard to find a human life. And then shiwangenan sumbraka. So it's very hard for things that are alive, for beings who are certain to die, it's very hard to stay alive. Dampe choni topraka, sanginani jumwaka, it's very hard for a Buddha to arise in the world. And Dampe choni topraka, it's very hard to hear the Dharma. These things are very hard to find. And it's very hard to avoid the affliction, dodge the flood of afflictions. And this distress goes on and on. In such extremes of misery, those who yet fail to see it thus, in misery's river they abide. Oh, woe, indeed, it's pitiable. So he's saying that people, although they're in this difficult state, they don't see it. They think that they're happy. They think life is good and everything's okay. So although they're in this miserable state, they don't see it. So then he expresses pity. He says in Tibetan, "Kihu," the expression of, like in English, "oh woe," sort of a bit of an archaic expression these days. But originally, it's just what we say when we see somebody who's suffering. How sad to see that. Like those who clean again, then dive into the fire once more. Although they dwell in misery, they fancy that they're fortunate. He's giving a rather graphic example. It's like somebody who, continuously cleans himself and then just jumps back in the fire. So he's saying beings in samsara, they escape from lower realms and they just jump back in. I wonder, doesn't say anything about this in the commentary, but I wonder also if he's referencing some of the yogic practices that I mentioned. And there were people in India who felt that by cleaning yourself, by washing yourself, that you are purifying your karma, or by burning yourself, that you're purifying your karma. But in either case, it's just saying that beings with wrong view, they don't recognize their current state as miserable, and they fancy that it's a fortunate state, fortunate place to be. For those who live as though they won't grow old or die, this state will come. They'll first be killed, then fall into horrendous realms of wicked birth. So it's quite, again, a graphic description, but that is how he ends his exhortation here, by just reminding us that if you have the sense that you're never going to grow old or die, then first of all, you're going to die, and eventually, whether in the next life or some future life, you'll eventually fall back into a horrendous realm of suffering. Whether that's a non-human realm or even in the human realm, there's plenty of pretty horrendous places to be born. So if we don't want to be born in a horrendous place, we shouldn't roll the dice, because we don't know how the dice are going to come up. And the only way to avoid rolling the dice is to not create any more karma, to be free to liberation, because otherwise when we die, we can't choose how we're going to be reborn. So finally, teaching great compassion. Now it's a more positive. The last two verses, there's actually a way out of this. So when shall I send the deluge forth, a rain of happiness sprung from my clouds of merit to pacify those scorching fires of suffering? So now he's saying, that now that I've talked about this for myself, when will I actually do this? When am I going to actually make the effort to accumulate merit and send forth a rain of happiness to pacify that fire? When shall I, with no reference point, collect great merit with diligence and teach the truth of emptiness to those oppressed by reference points? So now he's saying, that by collecting the great merit, so meditating on the perfections, but without holding them to be truly existent, how may I then accumulate merit and eventually teach emptiness to all the other beings who are oppressed by their conceiving true existence? So this is sort of the close of the text, because he's already described all of those practices extensively in the previous chapters, and now he is just describing the emptiness that then supports that, and then I will teach that to those oppressed by reference points. That is finishing this chapter, and then he goes on, as you might know if you have the book, to do the dedication after that. Quite a famous dedication chapter. Actually, what I ought to have done is loaded it here, but I didn't think there was going to be time, so I didn't actually do so. It would be nice to recite it together, but I will. Let's see. First, let's see if there's questions, and then if we have time at the end, what I can do is load it on here onto the PowerPoint and then share the screen again. But in the meantime, does anybody have questions? Okay. So no frame of reference came up in discussion. How is that related to emptiness? So first of all, yes, in this last verse, I translated this as no frame of reference. So the Tibetan is nikpa mepa, no observation, no object of observation. So I think reference point is useful because that is something that in English we hear often. We know that saying no observation maybe makes less sense to us than saying no reference point. But really that is what he's saying, is that it's not that nothing exists at all, but there is no reference, but there's no ultimate reference point. Everything only exists in relation to something else. So when we understand emptiness, it's going beyond any point of reference. It's the only thing that we can meditate on where there's no more reference point appearing to the mind. So that's just another way of talking about emptiness. Nikpa mepa, non-observation, is another way of talking about emptiness. So we talk about migba mebe ningje, the compassion without observation. So really, we could say that's compassion without a reference point. That compassion is not biased in any way and doesn't hold things to be truly existent, but is still compassion. So also a previous verse mentioned all things are like open space. Was that comparing open space to emptiness? Yes. We talk about two different kinds of meditation and emptiness. So the meditation on open space, which is when we first recognize everything to be non-findable. So he was going through one thing after another, saying that ultimately we can't find any of them. And then he was saying that beyond that is just like open space. This is what it's like. It's not that it is open space, but the experience of this spaciousness when we don't find anything, that's like open space. And then when we then come back to the phenomenal world, then it appears as an illusion. So then we meditate on the illusion like emptiness. Okay, well, if there's no questions, maybe I should just speak a bit because we still have a bit of time. Even if we did the dedication, it's not going to take more than 10 minutes. So I guess the original point of these talks was, why is this relevant, right? So even if we understand intellectually what Shantideva is saying, and how he's negating these other non-Buddhist schools, or also other Buddhist schools, what does that matter? How does it really help us? What does it really mean that this is the antidote to suffering? So as I said in the very beginning, when I had that slide of showing the earth, showing that ideally all of us, we'd like to take universal responsibility, as His Holiness says, to think that my purpose in life is not just to achieve my own happiness, but to take responsibility for the entire world. Now, of course, in Buddhism, we talk about all sentient beings, but in our immediate experience, we have this planet Earth. I quite like the saying of Mother Teresa. Some of you might have heard this when she was asked, will you just continue helping all the poor as long as there are poor people on the earth? She said, yes, as long as there are poor people on the earth, I'm going to keep helping them. And if there's poor people on the moon, then we'll help them too. So we don't know. Maybe there's other beings, other places in the universe, but as long as, once we find that out, then we can help them too. But the immediate experience, we're sure that there are humans and animals on this earth. So we'd like to be able to do something to benefit them. So then the question is, what can we do? That's a much harder question. I expect that most people who come to Buddhist courses, they have already some sense of feeling some kind of responsibility, that we look at what's happening in the world, all the destruction of the environment especially, and of course other problems, that what can we do about it? So then that becomes a much more difficult question. What do we, everyone has their own idea. So some people, one example I think that's quite interesting to think about is Che Guevara, because this was, as I can tell, an extremely sincere person who had a sincere wish to benefit a lot of people. And it's not so clear to me that it was actually very effective. It may have actually done more harm in a lot of ways. Maybe he benefited some people, but he did also kill a lot of people personally, which didn't certainly benefit them. Maybe he thought it was benefiting other people in the long run, but that, so then people can have a particular idea of I'm going to save the world and do this or that. And there's many different philosophies in the world of, so how do we end human suffering? But the Buddhist view is that as long as we don't recognize the cause, then we can't eliminate the result. So first of all, we have to identify what the cause is. So in the case of Che, he thought that the cause was essentially, bad government, and that if that was changed, then there would be, people would be living in peace, but also, what do you say, equality, that there would be much more balance of the world's wealth. And this was obviously coming from Karl Marx, who also, was quite sincere about trying to diminish suffering in the world. So therefore, okay, we identified this and he was quite clear, this is the cause, and once we eliminate this cause, this was the result. So in some sense, he was similar to the Buddha, but he had quite a different thing he was identifying. Whereas, the Buddha said that the real cause of suffering in the world is not a political system, and it's not anything external. It's ultimately people's minds. The real problems, the biggest problems in the world are self-cherishing and the conception of true existence. All of the other problems in the world manifest from that. So, obviously, if there was no self-cherishing, it would be very hard to have wars. And it would be very hard for people to oppress others and for there to be greed. Now, in terms of the self-conception of true existence, but without going directly into that, first of all, we can see that wrong conceptions in general have been a great cause of misery. So I mentioned in the first talk about science, and one of the great things about science is that it has investigated and removed a lot of wrong conceptions. Most of us today are free of a lot of wrong conceptions that were quite widespread in the past. We understand much better about the causes of disease. We understand much better about other cultures, and we understand much better about so we have in physics, in science, we have mainly physics, chemistry, and biology. So in all of those cases, we've understood much more deeply about what the causes that fuel the world, and what causes things to unfold in a particular way. And we've been able, therefore, to manipulate the material world to our advantage. Unfortunately, at the moment, we've manipulated it a bit too much, and it's not so much to our advantage, and it's also certainly not to the advantage of most animals. But ideally, we could also find a better way to manipulate it that would be more advantageous. But also then in science, we have psychology and trying to find the cause of human suffering, which is a more recent development in science. And so we have people like Freud, who thought that most human problems are rooted in childhood experiences, which there's certainly some truth in that, but I think he was too extreme, and generally in modern psychology, most people also feel that way. Except in certain very unique pockets, most people do no longer accept his theories. But there have been many others. So then there's been behaviorism, which was basically that we have to change behavior. There's no such thing as mind distinct from what we can observe in behavior, and therefore, like training dogs, because we can see when we train a dog, you don't have to change its mind, just change its behavior, and then naturally you focus on that. So there was this huge movement of behaviorism, especially in America. That later was kind of fell apart when it ran into obstacles. But in general, there's been a push for trying to understand human suffering, and it's generally understood in psychology that similar to the Buddhist view, that the problems in the world are coming from, psychological problems. People have too much anger or too much greed. And so that psychology's goal is to try to diminish that in order to alleviate human suffering. But then we have to understand where that really comes from. So Buddhism has its own, its own presentation of that. So it's saying that ultimately this is coming from conceiving true existence, a wrong conception of how things exist. So certainly we can see that, that, as I said, with all of these wrong conceptions people have had in the past, it's led to a great degree of problems. But this conception of true existence, it's saying that, ultimately we have to understand the world we live in. So as I said, with physics, there's a currently accepted theory of how the world arose, through the Big Bang and so forth. And then we have chemistry, and that then arose, through physical properties. And then there's biology saying that life arose from chemical things. So this is a theory of who human beings are. And then they gradually arose through evolution. So this has a very strong bearing on how we conceive of ourselves. Most people in the world, and I wouldn't say most people, that's probably wrong, but at least in mainstream culture and science in Western world, and there's the idea that people believe that we all are just a product of evolution, and therefore our desires are just a natural state of a human being a human. It's just a physical process that is not something we can really change. And then it has a strong bearing on our sense of our potential and our sense of who we are. That when we die, that it's just the mental processes in the brain that then, when those cease, then there's nothing left. So there's not really any more purpose to life, other than, as in the myth of Sisyphus, just enjoy pushing the rock up the hill as best you can. But you can also try to make it a little better by modifying things. So that's something that's really worth questioning. And Buddhism, when we really understand what's being said by the lack of true existence, it relates to that. It's saying that's not really possible, a world like that, where there is a physical evolution, and then that gradually leads to chemical evolution that gradually evolves into life, that gradually evolves minds. That's just not how mind exists. That's not what mind is. And so we have to really rethink who we really are. And that in an understanding can help to free us from our sense of our limited potential, and going beyond that. So as I said, in the first talk, I think it's good to have, we don't have to be experts in science. I certainly am not, but it's good to think about a lot of these views of science, and if we are studying Buddhism, also, to think about them in light of those, because they can both complement each other and also point out deficiencies in each other's worldview. So ultimately, what we're trying to understand in Buddhism is who we really are. So it's perhaps a more positive way to say it than saying we're trying to understand emptiness. But emptiness is the way of understanding who we are. So Shantideva is saying that it's not enough just to have compassion and to practice generosity and all of the great perfections. Although that's a wonderful thing, we have to also have proper understanding. So there are definitely people in the world who are materialists, who try to benefit people. Not just Shewatsel, but also people who do it in a more peaceful way. But still, they aren't getting to the root of the problem, because they don't really understand what the root of the suffering is. So if we really want to eliminate that, we have to recognize that through a lot of analysis. This takes a long time. This isn't just something that we can figure out right away. But it's good to have some kind of doubt. Then we have some kind of room for movement, I think. If we just are certain that this is the way it is, we just take it, okay, everything's empty and that's okay. I accept that, then there's not really any movement. We have to think, well, there's a lot of things I don't understand, and then identify those. And then, both about Buddhism in general, but also in the world in general, then see how can I identify better understanding of those. Then we can make some kind of progress with that. So I think if we have, and as I said in the earlier talk about, I think actually it wasn't in this last 2 days, but it was during the review sessions, that it's only great compassion that is the strong enough motivating force to realize emptiness. So if we really have a sense of urgency, we think about all the suffering in the world and feel, I really want to do something about it. I think a lot of the times the reason people might not have that sense is because it's just too difficult. It's too difficult to see all of these horrible things, and so we just tune it out. But if we can maintain a sense of, of being impacted by it, then we can feel a sense of urgency that something's changed. And only with that real sense of urgency can we have the motivating force to put all the effort into discerning what is real. All the study and meditation that go into that, it requires a lot of effort. So that's, we can use those to enhance each other. And so Papa talks about when he talks at the end of his text, Essence of Eloquence, which is one of his great texts on emptiness, he expresses his excitement, which comes through in the verses, what motivated him to write it. And he says that, at times I was motivated by, great respect for the great masters of the past, the great Indian masters. And at times I was moved by the teachings of the Buddha. And at times I was moved by compassion for all the suffering sentient beings. And these three together, like competitors, then mutually enhance each other. They kept competing and making each other stronger and stronger. Those three together can really motivate us to put more and more effort into this. So I think that's enough for now. We've got 20 minutes left, and there's one other question here actually. If afflictions are advantageous and are stains due to contaminated karma and delusions, is our conceptual mind similarly a kind of adventitious stain, since Buddha has no conceptual mind? In some sense, yes. The fact that we have conceptual consciousness, comes from our habituation with, with dualistic appearance. But that's a very important question, because, as you might know, there have been Buddhist scholars and practitioners in the past who have claimed that, therefore, conceptual consciousness is something to be abandoned. So we were talking about also during the review session about the debate at Samkhya in monastery in India, in Tibet, between Kamalashila, the great scholar from India, and Hashang Mahayana, the meditator from China, whose philosophy was that, all conceptions are like black and white clouds in the sky. They both function to obscure the clouds. So a good conception and a bad conception are the same in obscuring the sky. We need to be free of both of them. So we should just abide in non-conceptual awareness, and therefore study, and all this conceptuality is just increasing samsara, thinking too much about things. And that, the king didn't agree with him and then banished him from Tibet, and that's why Tibet, became very heavily influenced by the scholastic tradition that Kamalashila represented. But especially Dharmakirti, he was quite explicit about this point, that this is why he started his text, the commentary on valid cognition. The first chapter is about conceptual, inferential cognition, inferential valid cognition. And he's saying that in order to be free of all wrong conceptions, we first have to generate right conceptions. And Tsongkhapa took a great interest in this. And Tsongkhapa, he said in his Dogjudun Legma, his describing his realizations, how he followed his path. He said that at one point, when he was young, he said, "Jangchub Dina, Seme Junglogla, Jangtam Majub Duma Drinchiktu." So many people in this northern land of Tibet who have both those who've studied and not studied the great text on Pramana by Chandakirti. And he said, yeah, Doran Derong Huma Janjupla, Dropel Yaman Rinpoche there. So the Pramana Samuchaya by Dignaga and the Pramana Bardika by and is the seventh text of Dharmakirti, they have no bearing on the path to enlightenment. People say that. People were saying that these texts were just composed to negate non-Buddhist schools, which was useful, but they don't actually have any bearing on the path to enlightenment. They're just a way for Buddhists to argue with non-Buddhists. So then Tsongkhapa goes on to say, Jampiyangi Chuki Longpula, Dinimirik Mawe Pujundu, so I saw that Jampiyangi Chuki Longpula, also did some Deni Mohundu, Joa King to make the Gyoroje. So Manjushri told Dignaga, this is according to the legend, that Manjushri appeared to Dignaga and said, "You should compose this text, Pramana Samuchaya. Although in your lifetime you won't be famous, in the future you'll be like an eye for the world." So when I saw this, I saw that this, Tsongkhapa is saying, I saw that there's some disconnect here. That we all agree that Manjushri said this, but then people are saying this isn't useful for enlightenment. So how is it the eye of the world? So there he goes on to say that he engaged in the practice and study of the pramana, and this became an essential part of his philosophy. So in Tsongkhapa's philosophy, unlike the other previous Tibetans, his understanding is that in order to have a direct perception of emptiness, we first have to have a conceptual understanding. It's actually counterproductive to try to rid ourselves of all conceptions. What we do is first generate a conceptual understanding and then meditate on that until it becomes stronger and stronger, and eventually it turns into a direct perception. None of the other Tibetans before him had that idea. And he says it's similar to if somebody is very attached to a woman and he thinks about her all the time until he's basically going crazy and he starts hallucinating and sees her. So then what is so strong in his mind eventually appears directly to his consciousness. So it's the same with emptiness. The way to directly perceive emptiness is to think about it so strongly that it eventually just appears naturally to the mind, like a hallucination, except that a hallucination is wrong, whereas emptiness is a correct appearance. But it's the only way to do that, to gain that non-conceptual experience of emptiness, is to meditate on the conceptual experience. So although ultimately we're trying to be free of all conceptions, the only way to do that is to use conceptions to be free of that. So your question was that, yeah, since Buddha has no conceptual mind, right? So yes, ultimately we want to be free of that. So another example is, it's sometimes said that very skilled professional athletes no longer need to think about what they're doing when they play. But in order to get to that point, one has to train and think a lot about what one's doing. You have to do this step by step. So a Buddha, they say, is somebody who's beyond training. It's become spontaneous through long training over a long period of time. But at first, that training has to be effortful. And that requires conceptual consciousness to make effort. Okay, so there's no other questions right now. Let me know, B, if you have any follow-up to what I just said. Otherwise, we can do the dedication. Okay, so hold on 1 minute while I try to load this and see if I can get this in. Okay, so the thing is, I'm going to try to share this on the screen. Now, as you might remember, the first couple of days when I tried to share, I realized what was happening. It wasn't a problem with the computer. It was a problem with this PDF program that then caused it to crash. So if it crashes, then we'll have to find another option. I'll come right back. So let's see if we can read this together. Okay. So as I said, this comes right after the section. We had the chapter on wisdom, and right after that last verse he gave about when shall I teach emptiness to those whose minds are oppressed for reference points, then he goes on with the dedication. So, may all sentient beings be graced with the Bodhisattva way of life by the virtue I have obtained while reflecting on a Bodhisattva guide to the Bodhisattva way of life. Through my merit, may all those in all directions who are afflicted by bodily and mental sufferings obtain oceans of joy and contentment. As long as the cycle of existence lasts, may their happiness never decline. May the world attain the constant joy of the Bodhisattvas. As many hells as there are in the worlds, may the beings in them delight in the joys of contentment and sukhavati. May those afflicted with cold and find warmth. May those oppressed with heat be cooled by oceans of water springing from the great clouds of the Bodhisattvas. May the forest of sword leaves become for them like the splendor of a pleasure grove, and may the sword-like Somali trees grow as wish-fulfilling trees. May the regions of hell become vast ponds of delight, fragrant with lotuses, beautiful and pleasing, with the cries of white geese, wild ducks, ruddy geese, and swans. May the heaps of burning coal become a mound of jewels, and the burning ground become a crystal marble floor, and may the mountains of the crushing hell become temples of worship filled with sugatas. May the rain of burning coal, lava, and daggers from now on become a rain of flowers, and the mutual battling with weapons now become a playful flower fight. By the power of my virtue, may those whose flesh has completely fallen off, whose skeletons are the color of a white jasmine flower, and who are immersed in the river Vaitarani, whose water is like fire, attain celestial bodies and dwell with goddesses by the river Mandakini. May the horrifying agents of Yama, crows, and vultures suddenly watch here in fear. Those looking upward, beholding blazing Vajrapani in the sky, and wonder, whose is this brilliant light that dispels darkness all around and generates the joy of contentment? May they depart together with him, freed of vice through the power of their joy. A rain of lotuses falls mixed with fragrant flowers. It is seen to extinguish the unceasing fires of the hells. May the beings of the hells suddenly refreshed with joy wonder, what is this? And may they see Padmapani. Friends, come quickly, come quickly, cast away fear. We are alive. A fragrant, radiant vanquisher of fear, a certain prince in a monastic robe has come to us. By his power, every adversity is removed, streams of delight flow. The spirit of awakening is born, as is compassion, the mother of protection of all beings. Behold him whose lotus feet are worshipped with tiaras and hundreds of gods, whose eyes are moist with compassion, and whose head a stream of diverse flowers rains down. With this delightful summer palaces celebrated by thousands of goddesses singing hymns of praise. Upon seeing Manjughosha before them, may the beings of the hells immediately cheer. Through my virtues, may the beings of the hells rejoice upon seeing the unobscured clouds of bodhisattvas, headed by Samantabhadra and bearing pleasant, cool, and fragrant rains and breezes. May the intense pains and fears of the beings of the hells be pacified. May the inhabitants of all miserable states of existence be liberated from their woeful states. May the animals' risk of being eaten by each other disappear. May the pretas be as happy as the people in Uttarakuru. May the pretas always be satiated, bathed, and refreshed by the streams of milk pouring from the hand of noble Avalokiteshvara. May the blind always see forms and the deaf hear. May pregnant women give birth without pains, as did Maya Devi. May they acquire everything that is beneficial and desired by the mind: clothing, food, drink, flower garlands, sandal paste, and ornaments. May the fearful become fearless, and those struck by grief find joy. May the despondent become resolute and free of trepidation. May the ill have good health. May they be freed from every bondage. May the weak become strong and have affectionate hearts for one another. May all regions be advantageous to those who travel on roads. May the purpose for which they set out be expediently accomplished. May those who journey by boat succeed as they desire. May they safely reach the shore and rejoice with their relatives. May those who find themselves in wrong paths in dreary forests come upon the company of fellow travelers. Without fatigue, may they journey without fear of bandits, tigers, and the like. May deities protect the dull, the insane, the deranged, the helpless, the young, and the elderly, and those in danger from sickness, the wilderness, and so on. May they be freed from all lack of leisure. May they be endowed with faith, wisdom, and compassion. May they be possessed of stature and good conduct, and may they always remember their former lives. May they be inexhaustible treasuries, just like sky treasure, free of conflict or irritation. May they have an independent way of life. May beings who have little splendor be endowed with great magnificence. May unattractive wretches be endowed with, and the women in the world become men. Well, this you can dedicate as you like. You could say, when the women in the world have equal rights to all men, may the lower lily obtain grandeur and be free of arrogance. To this merit of mine, may all beings without exception abstain from every vice and engage in virtue. Not lacking the spirit of awakening, devoted to the Bodhisattva way of life, embraced by the Buddhas, and freed from all the deeds of the Maras, may all beings have immeasurable lifespans. May they always live happily, and even may the word death disappear. May all quarters of the world be delightful with gardens and wish of the Buddhas and the Buddhas, and be enchanting with the sound of Dharma. May the ground everywhere be free of stones and rocks, smooth like the palm of the hand, soft, made of lapis lazuli. May the great assemblies of bodhisattvas sit on all sides. May they beautify the earth with their own resplendence. May all beings unceasingly hear the sound of Dharma from birds, from every tree, from the rays of light, and from the sky. May they always encounter the Buddhas and their children of the Buddhas. May they worship the spiritual mentor of the world with endless clouds of offerings. May a godsend reign in time. May there be an abundance of crops. May the populace be prosperous, and may the king be righteous. May the medicines be effective, and may the mantras of those who wish to recite them be successful. May Dakinis, Rakshasas, and other ghouls be filled with compassion. May no suffering being be unhappy, sinful, ill, neglected, or despised, and may no one be despondent. May monasteries be well established, full of chanting and study. May there always be harmony among the Sangha, and may the purpose of the Sangha be accomplished. May monks who wish to practice find solitude. May they meditate with their minds agile and free of all distractions. May nuns receive their provisions and be free of quarrels and troubles. May all renunciates be of untarnished ethical discipline. May those who have poor ethical discipline be disgusted and become constantly intent on the extinction of their vices. May they reach a fortunate state of existence, and may their vows remain unbroken there. May they be learned and cultured, receive alms, and have provisions. May their mind streams be pure, and their fame become proclaimed in every direction. Without experiencing the suffering of the miserable states of existence, without arduous practice, may the world attain Buddhahood in a single divine body. May all sentient beings worship all the Buddhas in many ways. May they be exceedingly joyful and with the inconceivable bliss of the Buddhas. May the Bodhisattva's wishes for the welfare of the world be fulfilled. Whatever the protectors intend for sentient beings, may that be accomplished. May the Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas be happy, always worshipped by the lofty gods, asuras, and humans. Through the grace of Manjughosha, may I always achieve ordination and the recollection of past life until I reach joyous ground. May I live endowed with strength in whatever posture I am. In all lives, may I find plentiful places of solitude. When I wish to see something or ask something, may I see the protector Manjunath himself without any impediment. May my way of life be like that of Manjushri, who lives to accomplish the benefit of all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions. For as long as space endures, and for as long as the world lasts, may I live dispelling the miseries of the world. Whatever suffering there is for the world, may it ripen upon me. May the world find happiness through all the virtues of the Bodhisattvas. May the teaching that is the sole medicine for the suffering of the world and the source of all prosperity and joy remain for a long time, accompanied by riches and honor. I bow to Manjughosha, to whose grace my mind turns to virtue. I salute my spiritual friend, through whose kindness it becomes stronger. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful slides and presentation.
Thank you for coming. So any closing words? Otherwise, we can finish.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gache. So kind that you made time in your very, very busy schedule for these wonderful review sessions and explaining chapter 9 to us so skillfully. Could I please request you to talk a little bit about Grinding to Dust, the upcoming online program, so that people, know about it. Thank you so much.
Yes, so I had agreed to this upcoming program on Nagarjuna. So as I mentioned a couple times during the talk, last year, I gave 3 different courses on Nagarjuna's texts. These 3 texts were, so actually, Nagarjuna has 6 main texts on emptiness. So the main one, Root Wisdom, is very long, so I haven't had a chance to teach that. I may not have a chance for a while. It would require quite a lot of a long period of time. And also one of the other texts of those 6 is the Precious Garland, which is also long. It is actually a little longer than the Root Wisdom. Although at some point maybe I could teach that because it's a lot easier. A lot of it is on the method side. It's similar to this Bodhisattva Charyavatara. But in the meantime, I was teaching the shorter texts. So the other 4 of those 6 texts are quite short. So the first one I taught last year was 70 stanzas on emptiness. Actually, I taught that at Kopan at the end of 2020, and then at the beginning of 2021, when I was in quarantine back at Sarah, then I taught the 60 stanzas on reasoning. And then sometime mid last year, I taught the Dispelling Disputes. So the other short text of Nagarjuna is Grinding to Dust, which I hadn't taught because I didn't understand it. It's very hard to understand from just reading it. Actually, it's probably impossible to understand just by reading it. But very fortunately, there have been some, or specifically one Western scholar. There's been a number who have written about it, but one specifically, this book I read, which was excellent, because one of the difficulties in understanding it is that it makes reference to a lot of Hindu schools, non-Buddhist points of view, that if one doesn't understand what they're talking about, then it's very hard to understand the context of what Nagarjuna is saying. But this Western scholar, he had then researched it quite thoroughly in Sanskrit, because in Tibetan, these texts aren't available. So based on that, I was able to get some idea of what the text is talking about. So I thought it would be nice to complete this series of the 4 shorter texts by actually teaching on this, which I expect nobody has received a teaching on before. It's quite rare. There are no commentaries on it available in Tibetan. Although I did read in Tsongkhapa's biography, he did teach on it at some point, so he was able to understand it. I expect, unless we grant him the quality of omniscience, which we could, I suppose, then there's no way he would have understood it just by reading it. But also there is the auto commentary by Nagarjuna. So at least there is a little bit more that is available in Tibetan. But even then, without the context, it's very hard. So Tsongkhapa, he doesn't quote it much, although one time in Essence of Eloquence, this book, he does in fact quote it. So he clearly considered it, very important. Among the 6 texts on emptiness by Nagarjuna, it said that 2 of them are negating true existence. And then 4 of them are then talking about the mind realizing emptiness, focused more on that. Actually, sorry, 4 of them are talking about, are negating true existence. 2 of them are talking about the mind realizing emptiness. Among the 4 that are talking about negating true existence, then there are 2 that actually negate true existence, and then 2 that talk about how conventionalities can function without true existence. So those 2 are that about conventionalities are 70 stanzas on reasoning and dispelling disputes that I talked about. The 2 that directly are going against inherent existence are root wisdom, which talks about the actual subject of the non-Buddhist schools, or of also the Buddhists who accept true existence. So it talks specifically about true existence and how to negate it. What this grinding to dust talks about is their arguments. It's finding problems with their arguments. So there was a tradition in ancient India of debate, and they had what they called the 16 categories, or the 16 postulates, is how Thich and Jidba translated it, I believe, which were 4 styles of debate. And according to their philosophy, then the fact that the rules of logic function is itself a proof of true existence. This is similar, actually very similar, to the Christian idea in ancient Christian scholasticism that reason gives us access to the mind of God, and therefore because reason is reasonable, because there are reasonable laws in the universe, therefore there must have been, there must be something behind all of that. This is what Nagarjuna is showing, is trying to attack, is to show that just because the laws of logic are also conventionalities. They're not truly existent. This is a complex point. And so he goes to category and shows out each law of reason. They're contingent upon a particular way of understanding or a particular consciousness cognizing them. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's not an easy text. I wouldn't necessarily encourage beginners to come, although if you're interested just to get an idea, I'll try my best to explain it in a way that's accessible. And certainly that's much more possible thanks to this Western scholar and his work. So we'll go through it slowly. And the idea is that we'll have one session a week for several weeks. So we can go through each of these arguments. And I think, if people are interested in Nagarjuna's philosophy, it's very useful to see this, because it's a very different side of his philosophy. It's not like root wisdom. Of course, ultimately the arguments are the same, coming down to things not being findable in their analysis, but it approaches it from a very different way. And actually, because of that, then there have, of course, have been Western scholars who have argued that he didn't compose it; it was somebody else. But also, that was one of the things that in the introduction to his text, this other Western scholar who I've been talking about, Westerhoff is his name. He actually gives a very good reason why he thinks, there are several reasons why he thinks, it makes sense to say that Nagarjuna did compose it. But there are always Western scholars, finding holes in the Indian tradition, because the history is very spotty. But certainly it seems to me, that it reflects his philosophy very well. It's the same idea, but applied to a very different field of knowledge. And as Westerhoff says, just because somebody wrote text on 2 different subjects doesn't mean it wasn't the same person. People can have very different styles of writing, different presentations, based on what they're arguing about. So anyway, I think, as I say, it is not an easy text, but I will try to make it as accessible as possible. And it also, if we're trying to understand emptiness, this is really a good way to do it. Nagarjuna, there's nobody superior to him. Everyone agrees on that since then. All Tibetans, all Indians, pretty much. seem to, if they had some kind of faith in emptiness, then they said that this is the greatest authority is Nagarjuna. So hopefully, if some of you are interested and able to come, we'll try to do once a week. And if you can't come to the sessions, there'll be recordings also. Okay.
Thank you so much, Venerable Gache. So this program will start on August 9th,
Yes.
online only. Yeah, there is a little bit of confusions about online and here at Tushita, but unfortunately, Venerable Gache is not here at Tushita. Well, fortunately for his studies, that he's at Sarah. So thank you so much, Venerable Gache. And tomorrow we have a special program coming up just for the people who are here and for the recordings. Tomorrow is Shukar Duchen. Maybe Venerable Gache, you're better person to explain.
Okay, so yeah, Shukar Duchen, which means wheel turning holiday, wheel turning day. It's the anniversary of the first teaching of the Buddha. So it's one of the 4 major holidays of the Buddhist calendar. Enlightenment of the Buddha, which is the 15th of the 4th month. And then the Ladakh Buddhist, so the descent from the God realm. This is when the Buddha was said to have ascended and taught the Abhidharma teachings in the God realm, and then descended back to earth. I never quite understood why that was one of the 4 major points of his life, because he did a lot of other interesting things. But anyway, that is in the 9th Tibetan month. And then the Day of Miracles, which is the 15th day of the 1st month, which is when the Buddha was said to have displayed miracles as a way of showing the non-Buddhists the power of his teaching. Who they weren't convinced by logic in that case, so he displayed some miracles. But this is the actual teaching. He wasn't having to make recourse to miracles. He was teaching. So in some sense, that's the most important of the 4. We say that Sakapa says Zepakune Sungini Zepachokin Deani. So of all the activities of the Buddha, all the great deeds of the Buddha, the most important one was his speech. So therefore, you great scholars, you great practitioners, you should remember him by what he taught. So it is 49 days after his enlightenment. As you might know, he was enlightened in Bodh and then saw with his wisdom eye that these 5 disciples were dwelling near Varanasi at Sarnath. And so he walked there and taught them. So 49 days after his enlightenment. So we celebrate that. So tomorrow in the monastery, we'll be having pujas here, which is the way we do things here. And I guess at Tushita also, there'll be pujas and other events, maybe some teachings.
Thank you so much. Leading me to our all-day program. Anybody can also attend online, so you don't have to be at Tushita. So at 9 o'clock we have meditation and sutra reading. Then in the afternoon at 4 o'clock, I think, we have Medicine Buddha Puja, and in the evening, 7 o'clock, we do light offering ceremony, and one can offer a Buddha lamp with special dedication. So that is still possible today till tomorrow lunchtime maybe. Then we're running out of Buddha lamps, I think. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you so much again, and I'm looking very much forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Good night in India, and wherever you are, yeah, good morning maybe, or happy lunchtime. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, and thank you so much.